The following production is produced by the State University of New York College at Oneonta.
Good evening and welcome to this week's episode of Inside Red Dragon Sports. Tonight we have a very special episode for you as we invited into studio Hall of Famers Dick Burr and Vince Foti Sr., also graduates of the college. So stay tuned after the break where we'll be joined by the two of them and we're going to reminisce a little bit.
WUOW 104.7 FM is the region's premier radio station, offering award-winning programming from National Public Radio and Pacifica Radio networks, giving you the chance to become more informed about the arts, information, and entertainment from around the country and around the world. WUOW is your community radio station. Join us and support the sound.
Welcome back to the show. Joining me now in studio, Oneonta State Hall of Famers Dick Burr and Vince Foti. Welcome to the show, gentlemen.
Thank you, Geoff. Thanks for having us.
Well, I certainly thank you for coming by. And certainly as we start here, I'll say right up front, I mean, we certainly, on behalf of athletics in the college, we certainly can't say and thank you guys enough for what you've done for this, you know, for the athletic department support and for the college for the nearly 50 years or more. So I'd like to say that up front.
Thanks. We enjoy doing it.
Yeah, it's part of our job. But we're also athletic junkies, so we got immersed in that very early on, I think.
Now, just to go back, I think I'd like to maybe start from the beginning a little bit. Vince, you obviously grew up in Oneonta.
Grew up in Oneonta.
And you were a student here from 53 to 57?
Right, 53 to 57. Went off and taught school, guidance counselor, worked in admissions at Stony Brook and came back to the college in 1967 and worked my way up through the ranks and retired in 1993. Started out as an associate dean of students, worked in probably 4 different jobs, and when I retired I was an academic dean.
Okay, and then now Dick, you followed Vince from 58 to 62?
Correct. Was here, never did go out and teach or work in guidance, but had an opportunity to do some graduate work. Did that internship at Geneseo and came back to work the following year. So I was gone for 1 year while doing graduate studies. Came in admissions when there was no position. I was hired in a faculty line. Guidance department had been approved to offer a major, and Dr. Netzer found a way to maneuver me onto the payroll. So I came as an admissions counselor. When Milan Bundy retired in 1969 from his position as director of admissions, his assistant Cliff McVinney moved into the directorship and I moved to the associate line. When Mac retired in 76, I moved into the director of admissions line and stayed there until I retired in 95.
95. So you guys have covered, I mean, the college itself is just over 125 years, and you guys have been associated with the college for 50 years.
That's
I mean,
scary,
nearly,
isn't
yeah.
it?
I mean, so you've covered quite a bit of time and growth in our college, especially in the athletic area, but just overall in general. What was it like in the 50s and 60s as a student, and kind of maybe talk a little bit about the athletics? And
in the 50s, we mentioned before we went on the air about the era following the Korean War, early 50s, when there were a lot of veterans. When I started, we had 1,000 students in 53, 900 women and 100 men.
Wow. About
50 of those men were veterans who were taking advantage of the GI Bill. Athletic program for men, there was none for women. No such thing at the time. Very sparse. There was basketball and baseball for the most part. Wrestling came in later, but for 10 or 12 years, those were the 2 major sports. Not much developed in athletics And even in the phys ed department, there were sparse offerings in physical education. We didn't have a major in phys ed.
Right.
And if you know anything about the facilities back then, we had very outdated facilities. A gym in the cellar, so to speak, with pillars in the middle of the basketball court, very little outdoor facilities. Yeah, it was not a good time for athletics, although they had some pretty good teams.
Yes, we did.
And as they progressed through the 60s and 70s, Dick can tell you, as the sports were added and the coaches became a little more professional. Back then, of course, as you can guess, coaches were phys ed teachers and maybe coaches.
Right.
And there are a lot of stories about some of the coaches who weren't really coaches. But they did their best with the facilities and the amount of money they had to deal with athletics to do what they could. And those who played in the sports were very serious about it. And as I said, they did have some good teams in the 50s, but not anywhere near the caliber of what we have today.
Now, and then going into the early 60s, of course, that was kind of the beginning of adding a bunch of sports and kind of expanding, as Vince had said.
The college continued to grow very slowly from the time Vince came. In my freshman class, which would have been 5 years after his, we were up to 350 freshmen, of whom 300 were women, and still a few veterans. The athletic facilities on campus were basically still non-existent. Baseball games were played at Webb Island down Neowa Park. Basketball games were played in the Armory, so there was no on-campus facility. The soccer program started 56, 57 on a field pretty much where our current one is, but in the opposite direction. In 62, the gym, Hal Chase Gymnasium, opened. And with that, I think we started seeing some pretty good attendance at ball games. We had some teams that were decent. One of our bigger competitors in basketball was Albany, when Albany and Binghamton were still in the SUNY conference. And in fact, I think there were times we'd go to Albany with meet your brother up there, or he would come down here. Vince's brother worked at SUNY Albany, so there's a little rivalry, you see. And I think Doc Sowers at Albany always dreaded coming to Oneonta. He always used to say it was the darkest gym he ever played in, because it was not painted in those days. It was a gray cinder block wall, so it was a dark place.
With just the covering of the padding.
Yeah.
Did they even have the padding on the
And
inline?
Don Flewelly made sure that some of the lights were out in the ceiling. So Doc really disliked coming down here. I'm sorry.
No, the athletic program really did take off beginning in the mid-60s, which coincided with the enrollment growth of the college.
Okay.
And I think that's where Vince and I both were very fortunate. We were here at a time where new academic programs were being offered, new athletic programs, lots of new things, and an opportunity to work with students from the ground floor on up. That was one thing that we do not know how some of those students survived. There was no academic advisement office. There was no counseling center. There was no career development. There was a one-person teacher placement office. And students had the same questions then that they do now. Right. And so when they had to turn to somebody for advice, frequently the athletes would turn to somebody they'd seen watching a game, and we got to know a lot of them. And I think that was something that kindled our interest to this day.
And I think that's really, if we could talk some about that. I mean, your involvement kind of, like you said, you were into athletics anyway. You played in high school, and, you came here, you got involved with teammates, people who were playing athletics. But now you got a chance to actually work with them, help them. Is that really where your, the big interest really came into play, when you guys actually really got to work with them and meet them? And
yeah, I think Dick and I had the same initial experience with athletes. We just went to athletic events, and we can't discount the fact that the coaches even sought us out on occasion because they knew of our interest. And there was a need for somebody to help athletes, and there wasn't much help there. Coaches, however, did a good job for the most part, but the official offices were non-existent to help students. I happened to be on two committees that got me involved with athletes. I was chairman of a committee called the Student Progress Committee for about 15 years, and that committee, and this is in the late 60s into the 70s, probably into the early 80s. Student Progress Committee was a faculty administrative committee that dealt with students at the end of every semester who were in academic trouble. We met, reviewed records, dismissed students who didn't meet the criteria, put students on probation, that sort of thing. And it's, I don't want to say this the wrong way, but we dealt with a lot of athletes in that context. And as chairman of that committee, I got to deal with athletes and either dismissing them, readmitting them, advising them in between over the years. And Dick was part of some of that. And we got to be good friends with a lot of the coaches. The other committee I was on, I wasn't chairman of it, but we had a committee in the years may not be accurate, but sometime in the mid-70s to early 80s called the Priorities Committee. The Priorities Committee was a committee made up of faculty, administrators, staff, which served the president of the college in his decision-making about faculty, mostly about faculty lines. It was a budget oriented kind of study of what was going on, and the various programs were reviewed. Athletics was always under consideration under the chopping block, and it's not a secret now, and I have to be careful not to violate confidential information that I had back then, but the athletic staff, including the coaches, were always prey of the academic faculty who wanted the easy way out of budget problems by cutting athletics or by cutting phys ed. And I suddenly realized that there was no one on the committee to fight for athletics. So I did a lot of that, and I became a good friend of the athletic department in that regard. It wasn't a chore that I disliked. I felt athletics were important, but it was difficult fighting some administrators who felt the opposite, and some faculty who were thinking that the phys ed office is a good place to start to save academic jobs.
Right.
Those two committees, Student Progress and Priorities Committee, got me more and more involved in the athletic department. And also a lot of student contact because of that.
Right. Now, as director of admissions and working in the admissions office, I mean, you tell many stories of going on recruiting trips with coaches. I mean, maybe you can talk about a couple of those and who we actually got out, because a lot of them have been Hall of Famers for us.
Very fortunate to have met a lot of fantastic individuals and their parents and their guidance counselors. But one thing Vince alluded to, I think I should address for a second, the cuts that were made frequently impacted enrollment, because good students frequently look for something above and beyond their academic program.
Right.
And at one point, our combined health phys ed program had more than 30 staff members.
Yeah.
Over a period of a couple of years, it went down into the teens, and with that went some of the athletic programs we had. That made it difficult to recruit students who wanted to play certain sports. We did have some interesting times. Vince joined us, as did some other faculty members, and some of those stories we probably shouldn't repeat, but there are some we can talk about. Maybe I should leave a name out, maybe I should include it, but the coaches would quite often come to you in the fall or during their season and talk about somebody who they had seen or heard about, needed to make a contact, and wanted to know would there be somebody who could go to that school with them and meet with the guidance office and meet with the student. There were years we had a total of 3 people on the staff, so it didn't become too much of a guess as to who might be going with them, or they would bring them up at a halftime of a ball game and say, can you talk with this person they're visiting? Love doing it. You met some great people. To this day, enjoy talking with those people when they're visiting campus. Obviously in a whole different context now, but still enjoyable people who are looking for the best for their son or daughter. Yep. And they come about in strange ways. One year Garth came in, and I'm going to say it was March. It was late in the year for recruitment, but he came in and said, I've got to have a goalie, and I've identified a young man who I'd like to convince Oneonta would be the right spot to come. I need somebody to go with me. So we get a car and off we go, and we get up the other side of Syracuse. And you can only guess that in the Tug Hill Plateau in March you're going to get a foot or 2 feet of snow in about an hour's time. And as we got north of Syracuse, it started. Yep. By the time we got up near Watertown, everything was closed. We continued on. We were there. We decided, okay, the school's closed. Let's see if we can find where this young man lives. We did, and had the opportunity to meet with him and his mom over his dining room table and talked with him about what his interests were. And Garth really got excited. He said, this kid is a good goalie. I think we'd like to have him. And lo and behold, a young man by the name of Jim Burr was who we were talking with. Jim came to Oneonta. I think he still holds the record for most saves in a soccer game. I think he had something like 29 in one game. Yeah. He played for a couple of years before he went on and did some other things, and we now know him as maybe one of the best basketball officials in the country, and is a member of the Hall of Fame. Lots of interesting people who you meet, and that's one of those instances that sort of stands out and you say, wow, that was sort of an interesting trip. Now we just got to figure out how to get home. Yeah. Because the roads by that time were not in very good shape. Yep. But Brian Lamb was another interesting case, because I was in my second or third year and went to a high school which I had been to the previous year. And when I finished talking to the students who were interested, the guidance counselor wanted to know, did we still have room in mid-year? Could we take a look at a young man? Yeah, what's the background? Oh, he had gone someplace, and for a variety of reasons, it just was not the right fit. And I said, yeah, I'd be glad to talk to him. So, well, let me call him. I think he's at home. Where are you going for your next school visit? And I told her. It was a second school in the same district. She said, oh, you're going to go right near his house. Why don't I call him and we'll have him meet you on the street corner? So here I go, driving along a big black state car, and standing on the corner is this young man who I'm certain was not thrilled to be hauled out of bed at a relatively early hour. But this was Brian Lamb, who has gone on and done some great things, notably in recent years as a baseball executive, scout. But when he was here, he was an All-American wrestler, also a member of our Hall of Fame. Yeah. And in a weird coincidence, I think Jim Burr and Brian Lamb became college roommates. I'm not positive of that, but I believe that was the case. So many, many situations that you remember how you met the person for the first time.
Right. And it's amazing, even to this day, when you're talking about these people, I mean, you know the exact hometown they come from, their high school, you know their, I mean, it's just amazing. And maybe that's because that's the connections that you both made throughout the years with those, you know, your classmates, and then even beyond when you came back and you worked for the college. How do you think that translates to, because you still work for Alumni Affairs, do some work, admissions.
Still do part-time. When I retired, Dick Burr was director of admissions and called me in one day and said, I know you're bored, and we need someone to cover some high schools in the Syracuse area where they didn't recruit heavily. Mm-hmm. Those high schools were pretty much given over as a fact that those students would be going to Cortland or Oswego. Yep. And Dick Burr decided it shouldn't be that way. So anyway, make a long story short, Dick hired my wife and I to visit high schools in the Syracuse area. And that was 17 years ago, and we were going to do it for a couple of years. And we've been doing it for 17 years. And thanks to Dick, I have a part-time job, and I really do appreciate it. One of the things I want to add to what Dick was saying, and Dick will concur with this, is the satisfaction we got at the time that we're doing our jobs, helping students for the most part, either helping them to get in or helping them to stay in college, was part of our job. And we got thanked tremendously for doing those things, but it was what was expected of us. The satisfaction was there, but the satisfaction that Dick and I feel after the fact, 10 years after these students have graduated, 20 years after, 30 years after, bringing to mind incidents that I can't even remember. Thanks for helping me out with this. Thanks for helping me out of this mess. Thanks for coming down to the city jail and bailing me out. All of those kinds of things that afterwards you think, my God, did I do all that? And I hate to say this, but with the thousands of students that we've dealt with, there are some I don't even remember. At some of these Hall of Fame ceremonies, students will come up to me, or even parents will come up to me and say, I have to thank you for what you did. And I have to admit, I have to ask them, okay, help me out. Yeah. What did I do? But those were byproducts of jobs that both Dick and I really enjoyed. We enjoyed coming to work. We enjoyed the people we worked with. And the athletes were a part of it, not the total picture, but a good part of it.
So that really is kind of the love affair of Oneonta. I mean, Dick, where did you grow up?
I was born in Norwich, graduated from high school in Walton.
Okay, so nearby. So, I mean, you know, you guys have been in this, obviously you've been in this area for your whole life. I mean, what has it been about Oneonta and the college? I mean, you graduated from here. I mean, was Oneonta the place you were going to go? You lived in Oneonta. Was it just the place you were going to go?
Not really.
No?
Not really. I was working on Long Island at Stony Brook, my first college job, very content. And I'm glad you asked that, because I want to hearken back to what Dick said about a gentleman whose name may have gone over your head by the name of Cliff McVinney. Cliff McVinney was the director of admission just before Dick. And Cliff McVinney was an Oneonta High School guidance counselor, my guidance counselor. And Cliff McVinney is the reason I left Stony Brook and came back to Oneonta. I was happy in a job on Long Island, was home for the summer to visit my family, met Cliff McVinney downtown. He said, hey, we got a job up on campus, perfect for you. I said, Cliff, I'm not interested. And to make a long story short, back in those days, Dick mentioned President Netzer. Back in those days, you could be hired just like that with a quick interview by President Netzer. Cliff McVinney dragged me up to Netzer's office. Netzer said, I remember you as a student. If you want the job, it's yours. Get out of my office, I'm busy. And that was the reason I came back. But to answer your question more directly, and Dick will concur on this, Oneonta's, and you will as well, Geoff. It's a good small town. It's a cliche to say, but it's a great place to raise kids. The school system is good. Opportunities for your kids, our kids, is really top-notch, and you couldn't ask for a better place to live. So when I did come back, it was with some reluctance, but I was happy to come home. They say you can't come home again. That's not true. I did. And I'm glad I did. I had a very successful career here.
Yeah, very similar kind of situation as far as the interview goes. I was doing an internship at Geneseo as part of my master's degree. And one day in the hall, I heard somebody call my name, and look around, nobody calls you by your first name, but there was Cliff McVinney. He was bringing his son to look, Charlie, to look at the College of Geneseo. And he asked me what I was going to be doing. I said, well, I've got a couple interviews set up, but I don't have anything definite. And he said, well, why don't you set something up with Dr. Netzer, because we're hoping to get a job next year, even though it's not in the budget. So I called Dr. Netzer and set up an appointment, came in, and one of those very quick interviews. I'm not certain it took more than 5 minutes, but again, I remember you as a student, and you have the master's degree, or you will have it by the summer. Can't offer you anything in writing until the budget is passed. That's sort of the way it is now with the state budget, I guess. But 2 or 3 months later, I get the letter in the mail, and basically that was it. I did not have the benefit of working elsewhere. I came here, liked it, and the way it worked out with both Milan and Mac retiring over a period of 10 years, had the opportunity to stay and loved it. Yeah. I think one thing Vince and I both enjoyed was meeting students after they were here. And not just athletes, but all students, whether they had problems or a simple question, or somebody who saw you and thought maybe you have an answer that would help them through something. And those are some fond memories of people who we might not have seen originally, but somewhere in passing, And to this day, some of them stay in touch. And that's sort of neat to know, as you say, you don't even remember who some of them are. What did you do working with this person? And they certainly remember it because it's a key part of their life.
Right. Well, I think that's the key, though. Even though, like you said, I mean, there's thousands of students that you both have seen, worked with. You know, you may not remember them specifically, but yet they remember you specifically. And I think that goes back to the impact that you guys have had, not only on students, but on the athletes even now. I mean, you guys come to all the games. I mean, Dick, you're at every game. I mean, you're always up. We can always look for you at a basketball game or a soccer game or a baseball game, and same with you, Vince. I mean, how do you compare kind of the growth during the 50s, 60s, 70s, even into the 80s, when, like you said, the athletics was maybe not as strong? We did have, the 70s when we had a big growth, but now, comparing that to what we have now, can you make just a quick comparison of what it's like now for what you think for the college?
Well, the obvious is the preponderance of women's athletics. And as Dick and I have noted, back in the early days, there was no such thing. And the other major change, I think, for the better is the quality of coaches that we have, and the quality of coaches that we attract. The student athlete, the quality of student athlete, of course, follows suit. After you improve the facilities, you improve the support, you improve the coaching, then you get better athletes. And the students, coming up with better students who are also athletes was always a challenge. Good students and good athletes weren't always one and the same back in the 50s and 60s. Today they tend to be, and the other difference probably is the competitiveness of trying to get some of those good student athletes. A lot of good students out there, and a lot of good athletes out there. Putting those two together and getting them convinced that this is the place for them is the challenge. But I think the college does a great job for a lot of reasons. I got to give credit to the faculty, to the administration who are here, and of course to the coaches who support all of that endeavor. It really has made a difference. But it's been a progression over the years, as you know. Major differences are the quality of the athletes too, I think.
Yeah.
I think Paul Adamo would probably appreciate what I'm about to say, but the growth of scholarship assistants has been phenomenal, whether it be by foundations, alumni, friends of the college, whatever. The final year that I worked here, that year there were a total of 40 scholarships. 40. Wow. Some of them were restricted, so in effect for a new incoming freshman student, you might have 5 or 10 scholarships in a given year. Yeah. And as you compete for high quality students who are also active and involved and the kind of people who are looking for the programs you offer, you're losing a lot of good students. So now we're up over 1,000, and I'm certain Paul and the other people involved in scholarship and fundraising activities will keep at it, because I think that has enabled the college to attract some students who might otherwise have gone elsewhere. Yeah. Not just for the dollar amount, but sometimes for the prestige of saying, hey, I got a scholarship to Oneonta. Yeah. And that's been big, as well as the facilities. I think Vince and I can both attest that back in the 80s, perhaps our facilities were not front and foremost in terms of how we were spending our budget monies. And now we look at a campus that's well maintained, a lot of redoing things that had reached the end of a life cycle and needed to be redone. Yeah. Really a tremendous improvement in the campus facilities, headed maybe by the field house and the athletic fields.
I think the other big difference, Geoff, is the number of support areas that help athletics. Years ago there were coaches and there were a few people in the maybe administrators, a couple of faculty who are interested. Now you have, and Dick just mentioned, the development office. There was no such thing years ago, but it is a support system for the whole college, including athletics. There are more faculty involved. Your job, for example, was non-existent not too long ago. That's a support system that helps us get good students and good student athletes. You may not realize it, but all of those factors, including the strength of the coaching faculty that we have, all supports a system that, you know, puts us right up there at the top. And just look at the success rate of our teams.
Yeah.
It's not because they have a great coach or just because they have a good coach and good athletes. It's a lot of other support systems that help make that possible in all of the athletic, in all of the sports.
Yeah. And the two of you have certainly been at the head of that. And again, I want to thank you both for being who you are and being supportive of our athletic and the college. I mean, it's the college, and it's everybody, the students, the athletes, and everyone involved. So I'd like to thank you for coming by.
Well, thanks for having us, Geoff.
Well,
It's a
it's
Enjoyed
pleasure.
being here. Thank you.
Well,
Pleasure.
Certainly was a great conversation, and we could probably have you back again sometime, and we could talk another half hour. I know we could.
Well, we're both retired, so
I know where to find you, right?
you know where to find us.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I'd like to thank both Dick and Vince for coming by tonight. It certainly was a great half hour to reminisce a little bit and talk with them about their involvement with the college over the past 45, 50 years. We'd like to thank you for joining us tonight, and we'll see you next time on Inside Red Dragon Sports.